यमुना तीरा वनचारी, यमुना तीरा वनचारी, जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी, जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरदारी, जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरदारी, यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन, यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन, यमुना तीरा वनचारी, यमुना तीरा वनचारी, जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी, जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा, जय प्रभुपादा श्रील प्रभुपादा, जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा, जय प्रभुपादा श्रील प्रभुपादा। जो मिष्टपाद परमहंस परमहंस स्तोत्र सदस्य श्रीमती स्वामी विशेष भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, ISKCON संस्थापक श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जीवन विष्णुपाद परमहंस परमहंस स्तोत्र सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जीवन विष्णुपाद लकर किशोरदास बाबा महाराज की जय। जीवन विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्री भक्ति ठाकुरा की जय। जीवन विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबा महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप साधन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जी गोपाल भट्टदास रघुनाथ गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य दास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से गो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद दास साधु गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपकुंड श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरिगोवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोर ईश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री जगन्नाथ देव सुभद्रा दर्शन भगवान की जय, श्री मायापुर धाम की जय, श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय, गंगा माई की जय, यमुना माई की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, तुलसी देवी की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वंदन की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, ग्रंथ श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरु वंदन की जय, समावेद भक्ति वंदन की कौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल. All glories to the assembled. It is all glories to the assembled. It is all glories to the assembled. It is all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Kaur, and all glories to Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. So I'd like to welcome you all this Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Canto Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 22, Text 17. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Param Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshu Apatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtihi. So we'll read text 17. Yam harmya prishte panad angri shobham vikridatim kanduka vihva vihvalakshim vishva vasurnya patat svat vimanad vilokya sammoha vimoda chetaha. Yam harmya prishte panadangri shobham vikridatim kanduka vikvalakshim vishva vasurnya patat svat vimanad vilokya sammoha vimoda chetaha. Yam harmya prishte panadangri shobham vikridatim kanduka vikvalakshim vishva vasurnya patat svat vimanad Vilokya sammoha vimoda chetaha. I have heard that Vishwavasu, the great Gandharva, his mind stupefied with infatuation, fell from his airplane after seeing your daughter playing with a ball on the roof of the palace, for she was indeed beautiful with her tinkling angle bells and eyes moving to and fro. It is understood that not only at the present moment, but in those days also there were skyscrapers. Herein we find the word Harmya Prishte. Harmya means a very big palatial building. Swad Vimanat means from his own airplane. It is suggested that private airplanes or helicopters were also current in those days. The Gandharva Vishwavasu, while flying in the sky, could see Devahuti playing ball on the roof of the palace. Ball playing was also current, but aristocratic girls would not play in a public place. Ball playing and other such pleasures were not meant for ordinary women and girls. Only princesses like Devahuti could indulge in such sports. It is described here that she was seen from the flying airplane. This indicates that the palace was very high. Otherwise, how could one see her from an airplane? The vision was so distinct that the Gandharva Vishwavasu was bewildered by her beauty, and by hearing the sound of her ankle bell bangles and being captivated by the sound and beauty, he fell down. Kardamuni mentioned the incident as he had heard it. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuruttam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manubhishtam Sthapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Udapadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vidam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabadutam Parijan Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vidam Cham He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namuste Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Ushabhan Shite Devi Pranamami Haripriye Pancha Kalpatarupyascha Kapasnubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Moham Karoti Vachalam Pankam Nange Digrim Padam Hamande Shivaram Dharma Paramanda Madam Shri Chaitanya Mishra Hare Krishna. So here in this sloka, we see Kartam Muni is narrating to Swayambhuva Manu an incident which he had heard. The incident goes like this, that one time Gandharva Vishwavasu was flying in an airplane, and that time Devahuti was playing the ball in the terrace of her palatial building. He saw this beauty of Devahuti and also heard the tinkling of her ankle bells, and he fell down from his position. So this is the key points in the purport. We'll try to understand a few important points. One is that Vishwavasu was a Gandharva, one of the chiefs among the Gandharvas. These Gandharvas are generally the musicians in the upper planetary systems, and they are not exactly demigods, they are different classes of demigods. One of them are the Gandharvas and the Apsaras, and they are generally accompanied normally by their wives known as Apsaras. And it is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam that one who wants to be a beautiful person should worship the residents of these Gandharva planets. Now, when we say that they are higher than the human species of life, form of species of life, and lower than the demigod, that means they can perform certain acts or activities which normally a human being cannot perform, but they are not at the same time as powerful as the demigods. They have their own art, their culture, and so many things. So one example of this Gandharva is Narad Muni himself, where he says to King Yudhishthira in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, how in one kalpa of Brahma, he was there as a Gandharva, as a Upabarhana. And he was so beautiful that he was respected by all the other Gandharvas as a great personality. His body was decorated fully with flower garlands and sandalwood pulp and all those things. And he was always bewildered, feeling lusty desire in his mind. So it is described that how the denizens of Gandharvaloka, they were all extremely beautiful and they were attractive to each other. So Narad Muni was also very, very beautiful. And Srila Prabhupada mentions in one of the purport that he could attract the attention of women like a playboy. So to be a playboy means, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that it's very, very unfortunate, because too much of attraction to women will lead one to fall into association of Sudras. So it so happened there was a Sankirtan party festival which was organized by the demigods to glorify the Supreme Lord Krishna in the assembly of demigods. And the Gandharvas and Apsaras were also invited to take part in it. So Narad Muni was invited there, and he was so much glamored by his own beauty that he forgot what he was going to sing. Actually, the occasion was organized to glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But he started singing the glories of the demigods in a musical form, because they were all musicians. So the demigods who were in charge of the universe, affairs of the universe, they cursed, his name was Upabarhana. So they cursed Upabarhana that you immediately become a Sudra, devoid of all the beauty that you have now. So there are two offenses that is said that he made in this particular incident. One was that he went to join the Sankirtana party in the company of lusty women. I mean, he was there in the company of lusty women, so he got carried away and he lost his intelligence. And in the process, the second offense was that he considered the songs of the demigods to be as good as the songs of glorifying Krishna. So these were two offenses that he committed. And the process, the demigods got angry and they cursed him that you become a Shudra. So these Gandharvas, for the position of our residentship in the Gandharva planets, can be obtained by anybody who performs some pious activities. They can go to, there are many heavenly planets, and one of them is the residents of the Gandharva Loka. But what happens is that many times offenses are tend to be committed without, because the situations are such, the opulence is so much that one gets carried away very much in these heavenly planets. So here also in this purport, we see that Vishwavasu was a great Gandharva king, and he committed an offense of seeing the beauty of uh, Devahuti, and by seeing her beauty and hearing her tinkly bells. So he had to fall down from his position for some time. So he also got this position by pious activity, by the results of the pious activities he performed. But at the same time, he committed an offense by looking at the beauty of Devahuti. So he also had to fall down. So there are many examples given in Srimad Bhagavatam as to how great personalities have had to fall down by looking lustfully at women. One example is given in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Prachinabari was a great king, and he was ordered by none other than Lord Brahma to marry the daughter of Ocean, and her name was Shatadruti. Now she was very, very beautiful, and she was decorated with so many garments and all those things that, in a marriage, normally the bride and bridegroom, they circumambulate 7 times to this thing, so that it's like a vow of marriage. So when they were circumambulating the fire, it is mentioned that Agni, the fire god, there's so many demigods who are in charge of so many things. So Agni is the demigod in charge of fire. And when the circumambulation was taking place at the time of marriage, Agni got carried away by seeing her beauty, and he immediately wanted to have enjoyment with her. Now, normally it is said that women those days were never exposed outside, which is true. It's not like the days of today. We see that normally women go out to work and expose themselves, but those days women were never exposed. Only at the time of marriage, the husband would be able to see his wife, and the wife would be able to see her husband. So when they were circumambulating the fire, that is the time Agni got carried away by seeing her beauty. So the point that is mentioned here is that Agni had been carried away by seeing the beauty of, in the past also there were many incidences. So Sri Prabhupada mentions that not only the fire god Agni, but even heavenly god Indra, and sometimes even Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, they all get carried away by the attraction to the opposite sex. So the whole material world, if we see, as I mentioned before, is a creation to fulfill this desire of enjoying with the opposite sex. And this enables a living entity to get various bodies, sometimes in the earthly planets, sometimes in the higher planets, as we see in the case of this Vishwavasu. So the attraction is more in this material world, and as one goes up higher and higher to the heavenly planets, the opulence is also very high, and also the beauty of both the male and the female is so much that they get attracted to each other. And then ultimately what happens is that when one engages in affairs which are not regulated in the Shastras, then one has to fall down and be bound in this material world. So this way, when Shatadruti was being married, it is said that demons, the denizens of Gandharvaloka, great sages, denizens of Siddhaloka, Nagaloka, all of them were all captivated just by the sound of the tinkling of her angle bells. So that is why it is said that how powerful the sound of these ankle bells can be, that even great demigods, great personalities from higher planets, everyone got carried away by seeing her. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada concludes that woman is a complete representation of Maya. So there is also a quote in the Srimad Bhagavatam 4th canto, how throughout the history, great politicians, great kings, what they would do is they would train beautiful girls in such a way that if they want to kill an enemy king, they would use these girls, and by union with these girls would be given poison, and their bodies were so accustomed to it that they could utilize this poison to kill their enemies. So the girls would be made to unite with the enemy king, and then the king would be ultimately killed. So this is how throughout the history of the world, there have been instances where beautiful women have been exploited or utilized for other purposes. There is another example given in Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto, which I had mentioned about Prince Agnidhara and his wife Purvachitti. This Agnidhara was practicing actually yoga. Now, yoga actually is practiced to control one's senses and uh, so that the senses are not disturbed by even the slightest thing. But when Agnidhara was performing this yoga, this Purvachitti passed by him. And when she passed by him, he did not even actually first see her, but actually he heard just the tinkling of her uh, bangles of this Purvachitti. Immediately, he opened his eyes and to see her beauty. And at that moment itself, he got captivated her beauty. And he could see that actually she was sitting by his side. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that how the standard of living, irrespective of wherever one is situated, one gets captivated by the beauty of seeing the opposite sex. So Purvachitti was actually dressed in fine silk garments, and she was so beautifully dressed with so many ornaments. But seeing her, Agnidhara lost his intelligence, and to the extent that he, in fact, asked her, "How you have come without clothes?" But actually, she was fully dressed. But he got so lustily captivated by her beauty that he asked her, "How is it that you have come naked?" So this is how sometimes, not sometimes, anyone gets involved or captivated by lusty desires, one loses his intelligence, which is mentioned by the Lord himself in Bhagavad Gita. There is another example in the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam as to how the Lord assumed the form of an extremely beautiful woman. That was Mohini Murti. Might all have heard about it. Now, she looked very, very beautiful. And in that chapter, it is mentioned that in the course of the churning of the mountain, the demons, they got hold of the container of nectar. Now, that nectar is something, if somebody takes it, they don't have death. So the demons got hold of it. And when the demons got possession of this nectar, then the Lord made a plan to take the form of this Mohini Murti. And he took this form, and when the Lord appeared as a beautiful woman in front of the demons, actually there was a lot of quarrel between the demons themselves as to who should get the nectar. But when they saw this beautiful form of Mohini Murti, they agreed that she will mediate their quarrel. So when she took up this role of mediating the quarrel, they agreed to give that nectar to her. And in the process, what happened was, she took the nectar and gave it to the demigods. Now, the demigods got it, but in the process, what happened was, one demon in the name of Rahu, he dressed himself like a demigod and sat down in the line of the demigods. He sat beside the sun and moon, and when the Lord understood that this is Rahu, none other than Rahu, immediately the Lord cut off his head. But however, what happened was, he already got that nectar, tasted the nectar, therefore he remained alive. So this is one pastime where see how the demons got captivated. And forget about the demons. In the same canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is mentioned as to how when Lord Shiva saw the beauty of Mohini Murti, he was also captivated by seeing the beauty of Mohini Murti, and he was running after her. So it is mentioned that how Lord Shiva actually saw, just like a female elephant who is unable to maddened, Srila Prabhupada mentioned, just as a maddened bull elephant, male elephant follows a female elephant, that is how Lord Shiva followed the beautiful women. So, in the purport, Srila Vaishnava Chakravarti actually mentioned that wherever we see gold and silver, they can worship Shiva for material opulences. Actually, Shiva, this particular pastime was not brought to bewilder Lord Shiva, but to show that Actually, wherever Lord Shiva went, great sages were there. It was a lesson to teach all the great sages also that they can also be captivated by seeing the beauty of the opposite sex. And one example given in that particular example is about Vishwamitra, who was also performing tapasya, but he just got captivated by hearing the tinkling of her angle bells. So that is how one can become agitated by hearing even a small sound of either the bangles of the women or the tinkling of the angle bells. So it is mentioned that what to talk about ankle bells or even tinkling of the sound of the bangles. It is mentioned that even one can, by seeing a woman's sari, one can get captivated. That is how powerful is the representation of Maya. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned that if once one is attracted by, but once one is gets attracted by the beauty of Krishna, then he cannot get attracted by any other beauty, because all beauty originates from Krishna. So that is why the conclusion is given that when one sees an opposite sex, the impulse increases. Therefore, if a man is in a solitary place, he should not become agitated upon seeing a woman. That is why it is said that the impulse is so strong. By seeing, by touching, or talking, or coming to contact, or even thinking of the opposite sex, even in so many subtle ways, one becomes sexually impelled. That means even about when one starts thinking of a woman, he can become impelled and agitated. Therefore, it is said that a brahmachari or a sannyasi should never be allowed to associate with women, especially in secret places. And especially the Shastras mention that one should not even talk to a woman in a secret place. Therefore, one very powerful verse is given of Sri Amunacharya. The translation is, since I have been engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought and my lips curl with distaste. That means when one starts engaging himself in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, then one loses the taste of this sex pleasure. It's not only the question of man's attraction to woman, but also a woman's attraction to man. So when one is spiritually advanced, then one no longer gets attracted by the beauty of the opposite sex, which is nothing but a lump of flesh and blood. Srila Prabhupada always used to give an example as to how a person went to, he saw a very beautiful woman and he asked, how is it that she is so beautiful? And then she said, okay, I will show you the secret. You come after a few days. So after a few days, this man came to her and asked, what was the, how is it that you are not so beautiful like what you were before? So finally, she directed that my beauty was in that pot which is stored there in front of me. So in that pot, she had stored all her urine and stool and all those things. So the point that she was also, Srila Prabhupada wanted to drive by this part, the example was that whatever external beauty that we see, it is nothing but stool, urine, flesh and blood. We see a beautiful skin, but we wouldn't like to see flesh, which is with blood, or we wouldn't like to see a bone. So this is how external beauty is. But a real spiritualist, one who is practicing devotional service, not only sees the external beauty, but really sees the internal beauty of the other person. Not get carried away by the external beauty. Now, the other point that is mentioned is about how Srila Prabhupada mentions how their airplanes and helicopters existed even in those days. So whatever we see today, we see many aircrafts, jet planes, helicopters. We might think that all these have been created today, or we may look at it as glamorous innovations or discoveries. But the point is that these uh, aircrafts and helicopters existed even during the yesteryears years, but only the forms were different. Some examples we look at this. It is said that in the Vaikuntha planets, uh, There are so many airplanes which are driven by the devotees of the Lord, and the passengers are none other than devotees and their respective wives. And also mentioned that the ladies are as beautiful as lightning because of their complexion, but all these combined together appear just like a sky decorated with both clouds and lightning. So many times we see that the sky looks very, very beautiful. But in Vaikuntha, there are so many airplanes. It's not in ones or hundreds of millions of airplanes that fly with the devotees having their wives, and it looks very bright or beautiful, as brilliant as lightning. This is one example given. Then there is another example that we have a misconception that everything exists only in this world. But even in the heavenly planets or every planet, there are airplanes and facilities for travel from one planet to the other planet. It is said that in the Siddha Loka, which is also one of the uh, demigods, one of the planets like the demigods, there they can fly from one planet to the other planet even without having an aircraft. That is how they fly. What to talk about that, it is said that even in this material world, there are different types of yogas. And one of the perfection of the yoga is the Lagima Siddhi. By that Siddhi, it is said that one can become so light that one can travel anywhere to the higher planets and come back also. Many examples are that, even like in the Mahabharata, it is mentioned how Krishna and Arjuna went to the higher planets to retrieve the dead sons of Devaki. So it is not that one has to see a physical aircraft like what we see today, but those were all aircrafts on a shuttle platform. But Shastras mention that these were existing, and they were not only existing, but they were all very, very safe. For example, they mention how material airplanes are not at all safe. We have heard so many times aircrafts crashing, but these types of aircrafts in the spiritual sky or aircrafts in the higher planets, they don't crash. They are all completely perfect. They are so spiritual. They are brilliant, at the same time bright. And another example given is about how, yes, these airplanes in the Vaikuntha, in the spiritual sky, when they fly, what happens is there is a strong breeze that comes from the fragrance of the blossoming flowers. But this breeze is so nice that it carries the honey of the flowers also. But the inhabitants of this Vaikuntha, when they travel in these airplanes, they are so interested in glorifying the Lord that they do not get disturbed by even by the nice breeze, because they are busy chanting the glories of the Lord. Like we know that generally when the devotees are there in the spiritual world, they are only engaged in glorifying the Lord by their beautiful verses, songs, etc. So when the inhabitants of Vaikuntha, they travel in these airplanes, they are so much engrossed in glorifying the Lord that they don't get disturbed by the fragrances of these beautiful flowers or fragrances coming from various different types of flowers, because they consider that glorification of the Lord is more important than their own sense gratification. So the devotees are there, their wives are there, beautiful fragrance is there, but they don't get carried away by these things because they are very busily engrossed or engaged in glorifying, which they consider it as more important than their own sense gratification. So this is the difference between the devotees of the Lord and those who are not devotees of the Lord. There is also a mention that the airplanes in the Vaikuntha planets are made of gems, gold, etc. And they are all self-illuminated. They don't require artificial lights like what we see in these days. Karda Muni himself, which we will see in the subsequent slokas, he created an airplane which was as big as a city. We might see a small airplane which could carry 100, 200, 300, 400 passengers, maybe the biggest one. But Karda Muni created an aircraft which was as good as a city and was like a palace. and he took Devahuti all around the universe, not only in this planet, but many planets in different universes. He went and traveled and showed her. So this is how, because Kardamuni could do it because he was a great yogi and he was perfect in these things. So the point is that aircrafts were there and they were all very safe and were used in interplanetary travel. When Dhruva Maharaj went back home from the forest, he was received by the denizens of heaven. It is said that there were so many aircraft and so many airplanes were there decorated with gold, and they were all reflecting due to the sunshine that were there. So this was happening even during Dhruva Maharaj's time. And even when he was going back to his abode after winding up the pastime, he saw that all the demigods were there in their airplanes showering flowers like rain. So the demigods were showering flowers from their airplanes just like rain. The same example is given about Prithu Maharaj. Prithu Maharaj actually, he had his residential quarters in India between the rivers Ganga and Yamuna. So when he was performing sacrifices, the demigods also participated in that particular sacrifice he performed. So this indicates that even the demigods used to come to this planet and they used to come in airplanes, which were meant for their use. So when Prithu Maharaj and his wife Archie, they abandoned their material bodies, their bodies were actually burning in the ground. But what happened was there were two different airplanes which carried the bodies, one of Prithu Maharaj and one of Queen Archie. That was the soul was being carried on the airplane, whereas the bodies were burning down. So the demigods, they could see from the top as well as from the down how down the bodies were burning, whereas the spirit soul was going in the respective airplanes. So that is how the demigods were also powerful and they could have the capacity or they had the power to see these instances. There is one example that is mentioned in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, how Ganges water comes. It says, after purifying the 7 planets near Dhruvaloka, the Ganges water is carried through the spaceways of the demigods in billions of celestial airplanes. Then it inundates the moon and finally reaches Lord Brahma's abode atop Mount Meru. So we might see the Ganges water, but in the translation it is clearly mentioned how the Ganges water is carried through the spaceways. Why? In billions, not in hundreds, thousands, but in the spaces of demigods. That means the Ganges water comes through the planetary systems of the demigods and then comes to the earth in billions of celestial airplanes. Now, we may not be able to see this happening because we don't have the eyes to see. But Shastras mentioned that as to how Ganges water was carried all the way up to the earth. These celestial airplanes carry the water from the planets of the sages to other planets also. So it is not that Ganges water we see here only, it is carried to the planets of the other sages also. Srila Prabhupada mentions that how in the modern day the aircrafts fly and the earlier days also, because the airplanes fly by balancing of the air, different types of air. So similarly, Srila Prabhupada gives an example that airplanes used to be existing before also, and it used to operate by balancing of the air. And there was no power shortage, there was no shortage of anything. But only thing is, they were all not visible to our eyes because we don't have the capacity to see. But they are all there, they were there, and they will continue to be there. Srila Prabhupada mentions that even if we see the airplanes of today, whatever airplane is made, the elements that are used to make these are given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which we forget. So the first consideration is that the intelligence of scientists is not very significant, but actually one must consider the greatness of the Supreme Lord who has given the elements to make this aircraft. Then there is one more example of the beauty of women. In the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is mentioned that when Bali Maharaj was going up in the process of conquering, he passed through the heavenly abode. At that time, he went to a place where there were hundreds. The city was full of courtyards, wide roads, assembly houses, and not less than 100 million airplanes. And the roads were made of pearl, and there were sitting places made of diamond and coral. And also, he mentioned that everlastingly beautiful and youthful women who were dressed with clean garments glittered in the city like fires and flames. They all possessed the quality of Shama. So here Srila Prabhupada mentions what is this Shama? A woman whose body is very warm during the winter and cool during the summer is generally called as Shama. That means these types of women, they were all very, very attractive. And this is what Bali Maharaj, when he was conquering the heavenly planets, he saw. Coming to the point, it is mentioned that the palatial houses, which we see today, Srila Prabhupada mentions in this purport, that even great palatial houses existed even during the Esther years. So if we see the Shastra, they are mentioned of how so many different types of houses, big palaces were there during the Esther years also. But we might be getting captivated by hearing a multi-story building of 30 or 50 floors or even 100 floors. Another point that is mentioned is that about the ball playing, how in the Esther years also the ball playing was there, but it was restricted only to the royal families. Generally, in the earlier days, women were always at home. So they never used to go out and participate in sports and other events. But now things have changed, times have changed. So women are also playing cricket, football, everything they play. But in the earlier days, the ball playing and all were restricted to their respective homes only, and was also restricted generally to the aristocratic or royal families only. Another important point is that normally in trying to enjoy the beauty of an external of any object or person is like trying to enjoy sweet rice mixed with sand. You know, sweet rice tastes very, very nice, but if you mix some sand in it, then what we will have? Nothing. We will be tasting mud and little bit of sweet mud, that's all. So this is a quote trying to say that if we try to enjoy a material beauty, it is like trying to enjoy sweet rice mixed with sand. There is another quote in Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, where it is mentioned how a woman is compared to a fire and man is compared to a butter pot. Therefore, a man should avoid associating even with his own daughter in a secluded place. Similarly, he should also avoid association with other women. One should associate with women only for important business and not otherwise. So we'll try to understand a little bit from this. We see fire that is burning, and in that, if you put normally butter is solid, may not be completely hard, but it's like solid. But when you put a pan of butter into the fire, the butter melts. So the example is given here that a woman is compared to fire and a man is compared to a butter. Therefore, one should not associate with a woman in a secluded place, even with his own daughter. The reason why it is given is that we see today in many occasions that women, even men, have exploited their own daughters, their own sisters, their own mothers. That is why it is said that one should not associate with women. One should associate with women only for important business and not otherwise. This is also vice versa also. It said that if one, it is almost impossible for a man to keep himself controlled in the presence of a woman, even if she is his own daughter, mother, or sister. Indeed, his mind is agitated, even if one is in the renounced order of life. Therefore, Vedic civilization carefully restricts mingling between men and women. If one cannot understand the basic principle of restraining association between man and woman, he is considered to be an animal. I mean, this is a quote from Srimad Bhagavatam, that if a man associates with a woman unrestrictedly, then it is as good as he is an animal. So coming back to this purport, the point is that the palaces were there, airplanes were there, everything was there, and everything was so beautiful that even a great personality like Vishwavasu got captivated by her, seeing the beauty and hearing the ankle bell sound of Devahuti. And because of that, he had to fall down. So Karda Muni realized this particular incident, and as he heard it, and he revealed it to Swayambhuva Manu. So these are the points that we had today in today's class. For the next few minutes, I can take some questions or some comments. Does anybody have any?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Pranam.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Oh, wonderful class, Prabhu. Prabhuji, like as you said that, yes, of course, like sex is considered in this material world the prime, very like very easily one gets agitated.
Yes.
So why did Krishna made this like this, Prabhuji? The thing is, once Krishna created this, and again he says, don't get attracted, like don't be attracted to sex. So
Okay.
how do you understand this?
There is one example I gave. There is one thing called lust, and there is one thing called love. Now, there is nothing called love in this material world, but love exists originally in the spiritual world. And all our love is meant to love Krishna only. That is the only love. So I gave an example how in the spiritual planets, when the Renaissance travel, they don't get attracted by seeing the beauty of their wives in a lustful manner, but rather they both enjoy serving the Lord or glorifying the Lord rather than getting beauty carried away by even the beauty of fragrant flowers. So that is the real nature of our spiritual this thing. We have our, by constitution, we are meant to serve the Lord and glorify the Lord. But in the material world, it is said that it is a perverted reflection of love, which is called lust. So Krishna has created this so that at least we can understand that there is nothing called love in this material world. If you see today, can we say somebody loves the other person on an eternal basis? It lasts for some time and then there is a break. Whether a man loves a woman or a woman says that she loves a man, or even a man loves a dog or a dog loves a man. It's the same way. There is no love existing in this material world. It is a perverted reflection of what exactly is there in the spiritual world. So that is why there is no lusty activities or lusty desires in the spiritual world. So Krishna has created this beauty, so-called artificial beauty, so that we can understand that there is no real beauty existing in this material world. It is an illusory potency of the Lord. So all these examples are given in Srimad Bhagavatam so that we can understand that there is nothing real in this material world. It is illusory. But by trying to understand and also realize that the real beauty, real love is between the living entity and the Lord, and by trying to practice it, one can come to an understanding that what is existing in the material world is not love, but it is actually lust. And when lust is not satisfied, so many other things come like anger, greed, envy, and all those things. But we will not hear of these things in the spiritual planet. Did I answer your question, Prabhu?
Hare Krishna, yes, Prabhuji. Prabhu, one more question, like
Yes, Prabhu.
when you call of lust, So as in Dwapar, this Kali Yuga we can understand, but Treta Yuga and Dwapar Yuga also, these prostitutes were there.
Yes.
So it's mentioned. So why exactly at that time also the prostitutes were where lust were there at that time also?
No, prostitutes those days were not on a lusty platform, but they were all generally, if you see, from what I have heard, even a few years back, the prostitutes were not engaged in physical union, but rather they were all engaged in a lower this thing, like you have musicians and singers on a higher platform. So also you have musicians and singers on a lower platform. This was what was considered as a prostitution, but not as a lusty desire of sexual desire. If you see in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam also, there is a mention of how the great women prostitutes, they were all waiting to greet Krishna. So those prostitutes were not in a literal sense like what we see the prostitutes today, but their main this thing was to entertain by singing, dancing, and these were the considered on a lower platform. This is what my understanding of the subject is, which I have heard also.
Yes, Prabhu. Yes. So they were not lusty exactly, like they were just used to dance in the public,
yes,
and maybe
yes,
for
yes.
that reason.
Yes, if you see even couple of maybe 20-30 years before prostitutes, we see what we see today, but in the earlier years they were all basically singing, dancing and all those things and trying to give some entertainment. These were the types of prostitutes that is mentioned in the Shastras, not the lusty ones.
Okay, Prabhu. Thanks a lot, Prabhu.
Thanks, Prabhu.
And Prabhu, one more question. Like
Yes,
Brahma,
yes,
normally Brahma, yes, he used to tell his children like increase the progeny, like he wanted to increase the progeny and other things.
yes, yes.
But here we see that progeny only for Krishna conscious children only we should have it. Otherwise, we should not have for recreation, like sex. Like so, how do you understand this? Like, because Brahma used to tell the children increase the progeny. Brahma wanted number of living entities to come up. Like maybe I don't know. Please, if you can enlighten a little bit regarding this progeny, please.
I couldn't understand your question because Brahma wants
like Brahma wanted progeny. He wanted progeny from all his children. Like he wanted to increase his children. But now, if I'm right, Prabhuji, when Brahma wanted to increase the progeny, at that time, of course, they used to have sex only. Then they used to have children.
Yes.
Isn't Prabhu? So in one way, Brahma used to tell this, okay, you increase the progeny and increase the desire. So sexual desire increases there itself, na Prabhuji. How exactly?
Okay. Now I got the question. Brahma wants progeny. Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita that you can have sex to procreate children for Krishna consciousness. Now we must have the understanding that we can have not one, we can have many children. Of course, the law may not permit, but one can have as many children as possible. But that can be possible only through physical union. But at the same time, they should be devoted to the Lord. That means if the husband and wife are practicing devotion service, they can have as many children as they want. So that way, they give also an opportunity for so many conditioned souls to get liberated from this material world. So by this, if all the objectives are achieved, Brahma's instruction is achieved, to go for progeny. And then if a man and woman practices sex life to beget Krishna conscious children, that is also achieved because they go back to the spiritual world. Correct, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. Thanks a lot, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Can I ask one more question, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu, please. Sure.
Prabhu, in the spiritual world, when I heard in a class that there is no sex as such.
Yes.
Is it true, Prabhu?
Yes, there is no sex in the spiritual world.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandat Pranam. So, regarding the first question, why lust was given in this material world, can we say that it is given as a test for us, like
Yes.
whether we'll pass. If we pass, we'll go back home backward. Otherwise, we'll stay here only.
Yes, unless and until, example is unless and until we see darkness, how can we understand light and darkness? There are two sides of a coin. So we see lust and we see love, and we have to given an opportunity to understand from Sadhu Shastra and Guru that what is lust and what is love. So it is, if we see, we may hear, but unless and until we don't understand what is the difference. So that's why both are given, and both the Shastras also give which is right and which is wrong. It is true.
So it is some sort of a test also.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Any more no more questions? We can end the session.
Sure, sure. Anybody else?
Krishna Kishore Prabhuji, any questions? Dandavat Pranam.
Dandavat Pranam.
No questions.
Okay. I think no more questions. So can I leave, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you all very much. Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Prabhupada ki jai.